Climate change is a topic that we hear about nearly daily. Each of us are prompted to do our part to stop its advance, companies are pressured to eliminate their contributions to it, and many of the leading countries of the world have banded together to actively combat it, even if it causes them economic hardships, political instability, and national security risks.
Climate change has become a very emotional issue. Unfortunately, highly charged emotional approaches on any topic make it difficult to have calm discussions. But let us try. So, let's start by focusing on what the issues really are.
If, and that is a big if. If the Earth's climate is changing, is that necessarily bad? Do we really need to be alarmed about the changes?
And, if it is changing, what is really causing the climate to change? Are the variations we see in our annual climate swings more extreme than what people have seen in the past? Is it caused by current human activity? Is the Earth's climate really so sensitive to how we live, to cause it to change dramatically?
And, most importantly, is there anything we can reasonably do to create the kind of climate we want? That is, if our so-called experts can agree among themselves what kind of climate is best.
We may be able to find some of the answers to these questions by finding out what is behind these alarming climate predictions, and also by reviewing past changes in the Earth's climate. But before we start doing that, let's briefly discuss why we need to be concerned with the issue of climate change.
Although we have been hearing alarming climate predictions across most forms of media for the past few years, that trend is not new. So-called climate experts have been predicting dramatic changes in the Earth's climate since at least the 1960s. Sometimes they predicted it would get hotter, and sometimes they believed it would get colder. But always with severe consequences. As you can see by looking at the list on the screen, none of them have happened.
Perhaps the most recent one to get a lot of public emphasis was issued by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2019, and was endorsed by a popular congressional group that calls themselves the Squad. In the words of one of the Squad members, quote, "The world is gonna end in 12 years if we don't address climate change." Unquote.
Perhaps a word of caution is needed at this point. Note that these predictions are stated in a way to impress us that, if not acted upon, there will be catastrophic consequences. It is as if they are trying to frighten us into taking their directed actions. It really is a high-pressure sales technique. To a large extent, the current environmental emphasis is a part of the modern progressive movement. It goes beyond just being a good steward of the wonderful earth that God has given us. These alarmists claim to promote social progress and reform. Since at least the early 1900s, the progressive movement has supported some good changes, but they have also been the driving force for some very bad activities. To accomplish some of their supposed greater good for society, sometimes people had to make extreme sacrifices. Sometimes whether they liked it or not. Sometimes they were not given a choice.
As we hear the environmental alarmists' warnings, we also need to be aware of their proposed solutions. Although they broadly proclaim relatively modest actions we should take, we also need to know the activity they advocate in their more private meetings, which may signal their true proposed direction, once they achieve the power to do so.
For instance, consider the suggestions by Matthew Liao to use genetic engineering and other scientific advances to discourage human consumption of meat products, to keep humans from growing so large, thereby reducing our need for food, to reduce our need for nighttime illumination by giving us cat-like eyes, and to limit the size of human families. With similar enthusiasm, Eric Pianka spoke of the desirability to reduce the human population on Earth by as much as 90%. He raised the possibility that it could be achieved with the appearance of an airborne version of the Ebola virus.
Let's now look at information about the climate prediction process. First and foremost, the Earth's climate is very complicated. It results from a wide variety of complex processes. As a result, there is no one that really understands all of the factors and how they interact to produce our climates. But, we find that the main difference between the alarmists and the skeptics is what is called climate sensitivity. That is how much the Earth's average surface temperature changes with a factor.
If that factor is carbon dioxide, a high climate sensitivity means that increased carbon dioxide amplifies global warming. On the other hand, low sensitivity means the Earth will resist additional warming. You might choose to think of it this way. High sensitivity is an unstable climate, while low climate sensitivity means it is inherently stable.
In the current climate change issue, those people advocating severe climate change believe that Earth's climate is unstable with changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Whereas, those of us that are skeptical that we are in imminent danger believe that God designed the Earth and all its systems to interact in a way that maintains a relatively stable climate.
The parts of the climate models related to the Earth's stability are uncertain parameters. The strongest one may be the influence of clouds. The science of clouds is poorly understood. How and when they form. Their changing composition. Their migration. In short, their full nature. The various sensitivity parameters are chosen and input into the model to produce results believed to be about right. They are not defined by physics or scientific studies, but are chosen based on the researcher's experience and beliefs about Earth's past climate changes. They are subjective, and, as we have seen, historically have been quite inaccurate.
Since the current focus seems to be on large increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide, let's look at that. How much of our atmosphere is composed of carbon dioxide anyway? 25%? 10%? How about 5%? We will let this box represent Earth's atmosphere, but we will not include water vapor, since it varies so much. The most common gas in our atmosphere is nitrogen. Nitrogen takes up about 78% of it. We all know how important oxygen is to us. This is the next largest part of our air. It is about 21% of it. 78 plus 21 is 99. That leaves about 1% of our atmosphere. So that is probably carbon dioxide. Right? Wrong. Argon makes up almost 1% of our atmosphere. These three gases make up 99.96% of our atmosphere. So where does carbon dioxide fit? It is next at 0.038% of our air. It is a small part of the air we breathe, but it is a powerful greenhouse gas. So let's also look at how the Earth keeps it at relatively stable limits.
God has designed different physical and biological systems on Earth, which work together to maintain conditions that are favorable to life. There is a lot about these systems that we do not know yet, but let's talk about one familiar process, which helps control atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. We know that plants need carbon dioxide to grow, and that with increases in it, they grow more vigorously and consume more of it. We also know that they grow more efficiently, using less water, allowing the plants to spread into drier locations. According to published accounts, some desert, or at least arid areas, are shrinking as carbon dioxide increases and surrounding vegetation expands. Increased carbon dioxide levels also favor ocean algae blooms, which removes more of it from the air and eventually deposits it on the ocean floors.
There is a physical effect scientists call energy balance that describes the trade-offs between absorbing and emitting energy by bodies. Climatologist calculations of energy balance of the Earth show that the Earth's climate should be stable as carbon dioxide levels increase. These are just a couple of examples, showing how the Earth's systems work together to keep our climate stable.
Although the Earth's climate is stable, there are factors that can combine to cause it to temporarily swing one way or the other. The medieval warm period may have allowed the Vikings to establish farming colonies in Greenland for several hundred years. In contrast, During the Little Ice Age, the Thames River in London froze so solid that the locals held festivals on top of it. Some of the shopkeepers even put fires inside their buildings to keep warm. Let's now consider a couple of those other factors that may influence our climate today and in the future.
Since at least the early 1800s, scientists have speculated that changing numbers of sunspots could be affecting the Earth's weather and climate. From minimum sunspot activity to maximum, there is only a slight variation in the sun's visible light output. As you can see, it is more pronounced in the ultraviolet range. But even the change in UV radiation is probably not enough to cause significant climate changes. It is not easily shown, but there are also cycles in the strength of the sun's magnetic field. Combined with other solar phenomena, they significantly affect the numbers of cosmic rays that enter our atmosphere. Recent research suggests that cosmic rays, as part of a complex process, may be an important factor in cloud cover. You may recall that we previously identified clouds as, perhaps, the leading contributor to climatic temperature variations.
Some scientists are expecting an upcoming period of extended reduced solar activity called a grand solar minimum. The sun usually cycles between little to no solar activity to a maximum number of sunspots every 11 years. During a grand solar minimum, the period of very low numbers of sunspots can last much longer than normal. The grand solar minimum from 1645 to 1715 AD, also called the Maunder minimum, corresponded with a cold period many people call the Little Ice Age. It is possible that the Maunder minimum, and perhaps combined with other factors, caused it to happen.
There was a time in the past when there was a major climate change. Following that event, God promised that, as long as the earth endures, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. That sounds like he told us that the Earth's climate will stabilize once again, and remain relatively stable, as long as the Earth exists. Let us examine that event, to understand what it took to disrupt Earth's climate.
That event was what many people call Noah's flood. But it was much more than what we usually think of when we speak of a flood. There was a lot of water, to be sure. The Bible described it as raining for 40 days and nights, and that water covered even the highest mountains. But before it happened, God vowed that He would destroy the earth. Just before it started raining, the Bible says that God did something unusual. He burst open the sources of the watery depths. That is a rather curious statement. It is not clear what that really means.
It may be describing the breakup of the Earth's crust beneath the oceans. As one writer describes the results of sophisticated computer models depicting this event, quote, "The overlying crust stretched and thins, allowing the magma to break through very rapidly, along the linear belts, stretching thousands of miles along the ocean floor. As this molten material came into contact with cold seawater, it generated a long, linear geyser of superheated water ejected into the atmosphere," unquote. That was apparently the initial event that set into motion all that would soon happen.
It appears that most of the major natural catastrophes that we experience today, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, intense storms, and massive ocean waves, were occurring nearly simultaneously, but on a much more massive, global scale. In addition, we believe that all the inhabited area at that time was combined into a single large continent called Pangaea. During the flood, Pangaea was split in pieces, which then drifted and formed the smaller continents that we have today. There were some of these plates that collided and formed mountain ranges. Unseen, beneath the waters, a new ocean floor was formed. The devastation of all of these catastrophes happening together is unimaginable. The result was the world of that time was destroyed.
During and after the year-long flooding of the Earth, there was a lot of volcanic activity. We know of at least 6 supervolcanic eruptions, and there were probably hundreds of smaller ones. We normally think of volcanoes as spilling lava out the top and possibly burying villages or whatever is in its path. But volcano eruptions do much more. In addition to the things they do here on the ground, they explosively throw a lot of debris high into the atmosphere, such as various gases and clouds of ash. These aerosols can change the world's average temperature. Volcanoes can have big effects. But, supervolcanoes can magnify those impacts many times.
For instance, Yellowstone National Park is the site of an ancient supervolcanic eruption, probably following Noah's flood. It is estimated that the eruption caused climate changes for the world for years to decades after its eruption. Some of the other 5 supervolcanoes that erupted at about the same time were even larger. They probably caused decreased global temperatures for many more years. Summers would have been very mild for centuries.
While it would have been cooler on land, the oceans were a different story. The new ocean floor, undersea eruptions, and the continental movements would have caused the oceans to be very warm. As a result, the Earth would have had heavy snowfalls over the land in winter months, and only a small amount of melting during the summers, particularly at high latitudes or on mountains. This is a perfect recipe for an ice age. Creationist researchers have demonstrated that the Great Ice Age probably began shortly after the Great Flood, about 4,500 years ago, and lasted for 500 to 700 years. As we think about Noah's flood and the Great Ice Age, we realize that it took extraordinary circumstances to significantly change Earth's climate. And once those events passed, God used the strong stability of the Earth's designed systems to begin the return to a life-friendly environment. If the climate is changing, and not just fluctuating, it is possible that the changes we see are a part of the process returning Earth to an optimum climate.
In summary, alarmist environmental threats have historically been wrong, and appear to be an effort to make us hastily accept their desired changes to our way of life. Their worldview of a very old Earth allows them to believe that Earth's climate is unstable. However, scientific evidence supports the biblical account of the Earth's creation, the subsequent extraordinary destruction of its surface, the disruption of its climate, and its return to an life-friendly environment. This was possible because it has an inherently stable climate. Although we do want to be good caretakers of the animal and plant life God has provided on this magnificent planet, we do not need to be concerned for the climate. We do need to trust God's promise that as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease.